thanks everybody for coming to the session. My name is Ben. I'm a former Mozillian. I now run a program at Consumer Reports on digital consumer protection. So we're working with the Data Futures Lab to make these data rights that you've been hearing about real. We want to make them real and very easy and meaningful to exercise. So as you heard Anouk say, if you go to the next slide, new privacy legislation like GDPR and CCPA create a new class of privacy rights, but also data rights. So these are really interesting because we really didn't have these rights before. These include, if you go to the next slide, for instance, the right to know what kind of data a company has collected on you. Before GDPR and CCPA, and if you're not in a jurisdiction covered by those two laws, you might not have the right to know. You could go to a company and say, please tell me what data you've collected on me. And they could say, can't do that. The right to delete, same story. You might not want a company that you previously shared your data to have that data anymore. Or you might not want a company who got your data from somebody else to have that data. And now with GDPR and CCPA, you do have that right. And in the context of California, another big concept is the right to opt out of the sale of your data. So you might be fine with, Facebook having your data, but you don't want Facebook selling your data to a third party. And these new laws give you new rights. It's amazing, and not every day that you gain rights. And so we often say, data rights are human rights, or that privacy is a human right. These laws are really creating the concrete basis and making that statement real. But, and I'm sure lots of you in this session know this already, if you go to the next slide, it's really hard to exercise these rights. So if you could just head over to the next slide, thank you. What do we mean by it's hard to exercise these rights? So if you wanted to exercise your right to know or your right to delete with Facebook or a consumer brand or a data broker, you'd have to go to the site. You'd probably have to scroll down to the footer, find a very weird link, go through a bunch of hoops, and maybe within 45 business days, they might process your request in a way that's satisfactory to you. So for an individual company, not very happy experience. But then think about the fact that if you wanted to exercise your data rights at scale, you'd have to go and do that with every company that has your data, including some companies that you might not know about. So we need mechanisms for people to meaningfully exercise these rights. And there's some interesting concepts in the California Consumer Privacy Act and in GDPR that say a consumer should be able to delegate these rights to a trusted third party. So if you can head to the next slide, this is not a very feasible model, right? You as the individual consumer going to every company individually and exercising your rights in a process that is defined by the company, as opposed to a uniform process. This isn't really going to work if you're thinking about taking control of your data or getting more value out of your data. But in a world where you've got a trusted intermediary or an authorized agent, a trusted institution like Mozilla or Consumer Reports could do that for you. So if you can head to the next slide, and the one after that, sorry. And the one after that, sorry. You could say, hey, authorized agent, I want you to exercise your best judgment according to what you know about my best interests and my preferences. So I might say, authorized agent, just opt me out of all data sale. I don't want anyone to ever sell my data. Or hey, authorized agent, delete my data from these 10 services. Or authorized agent, help me build an awareness of what data has been collected by a set of companies. You would tell the authorized agent, and the authorized agent would handle all the hard work and the techniques of delivering on that for you. So this kind of mechanism is going to make the data rights a lot more real. It's one part of realizing the goals, the policy objectives of GDPR and CCPA. If you go to the next slide, what we're doing with the Data Futures Lab is trying to build brick by brick the techniques that are needed to make this kind of thing work. So one brick is a reference implementation for how an authorized agent should work. And some examples of what needs to be in any authorized agent include confirming your identity. you need to be able to send a verifiable consumer request, which means you need to establish some proof of identity for who you claim to represent. And so we built kind of a reference implementation. It's an open source repo. It's very early, but we're going to be building out over the next year and two. And this system, if you go to the next slide, has a couple elements. So it does verify consumer identity in a really simple way now by confirming your email address and your phone number. And in the future, you can envision other proofs of identity. It gets into the whole kind of identity innovation space, which can quickly get very complicated. But just to start, we can say we have confirmed the phone number and email of this person. And the other thing that this reference implementation does is it secures your permission in a legally acceptable way. So in every jurisdiction, there's sort of a different idea of what permission needs to look like. In California, you need a power of attorney to use all of the rights. That's going to be a pretty big bar to cross because you need to get a power of attorney notarized, and there's all kinds of things that kind of keep this from working. Some of the other rights, you can have a limited power of attorney or even a simple permission letter. So what we've built is a tool that will enable institutions to quickly become authorized agents. And if you can go to the next slide, there's a little demo here, which looks like we won't be able to show right now. But it's a pretty straightforward little tool here. It uses really modular code. It has an API integration with like Twilio and DocuSign and common services that people might use to secure a digital signature, to confirm a phone number, and so on. And the idea is that if you launch a service based on this, now you've got everything you need to go out and represent the consumer. So you could show up and say, look, I've verified the identity of Anouk. I've also got proof that Anouk has authorized me to be their agent, and I hereby exercise Anouk's right to deletion or right to know. So this is really the primitives of what's going to enable more meaningful exercise of these data rights at greater scale and in more creative ways. If you can go to the next slide, and I swear I'm almost done. Thank you for letting me ramble. We are interested in building an ecosystem, and there's lots of work that's needed to make this work. And we think that a really good way to build the ecosystem is to build a service, a demonstration service that real people can really use. And so what we're going to be doing subsequent to our work with the Data Futures Lab is building out a prototype mobile app that will use this system to confirm the consumer's identity, to gain their permission, and then create a layer over their data rights, an interface layer that'll enable them to almost Tinder-like say, I don't want that company to have my data. I do want that company to have my data. And think creatively about the features that we can bootstrap on top of these new primitives. Next slide. And that's going to be really helpful to clarify what is going to be needed in the law to really make this work, because we are going to hit some barriers. In the end, because there's no formal definition of what a verified consumer request is, a company can reject an authorized agent request just by saying, we don't believe that you verified the consumer's identity. So we know that there's lots of kind of standards work that needs to be done. It's almost like if you had a right to connect, but you did not have TCP/IP. That's kind of where we are today with data rights. You've got them, but there's not a great way to exercise them. There's no agreement on how the interface should work between consumers, agents, and companies. And so we want to work with all of you to begin to fill that out and to invent that. I think that takes me to the end of my presentation. Let me just double check here. You'll hear a lot about different applications of data rights and what it might enable. But if you want to get in touch, if you go to the last slide here, you can get in touch with me, Ben Moskowitz, on Twitter or by email, or you can drop a line to this institutional address. If any of this piques your interest, if you want to collaborate, we would love to work with you on any aspect of what we talked about. And I'm looking forward to answering any questions and digging in more in the future. Thanks, Anouk.